let me introduce our second speaker of the day is Thomas Glanz from the University of Zurich. Thomas previously held several academic positions in various cities such as Basel and Bremen and Moscow, and he has an interest or research focus both on Czech and Russian art and culture, both on literature and visual and performance art. And now let me give you the mic and welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I am really excited to listen to talks, and I am a little bit disappointed that now I cannot listen to interesting talks because I have to deliver my oven, but it will be only for 20 minutes, and it's about Jindřich Chaloupecký's role in networks and transfers and trans communications during 60s, 70s. And my actual task is not to devote the whole 20 minutes to Russian artists, to whom Chaloupecký did pay a lot of attention between 1965 and 1978, and I have been studying this story on and off for like over 20 years, and last week I have finally finished the text which attempts to give a sort of overview of the whole thing, but it's a separate topic I would like to skip today. It was, maybe some of you know something about this story. Chaloupecký traveled to the Soviet Union repeatedly, met a lot of artists. About all of them he did write something or said something. He had a huge correspondence with a lot of artists and theologians, and this story is now part of an exhibition which is going on in Prague under the title The Words of Jindřich Chaloupecký until June 19th. And we have been a group of curators, and my task was this Russian corner, Russian section of the exhibition, but the whole exhibition, I think it's somehow provoking, and also for our topic, a relevant one. Daniel Gruň wrote a very critical review. I didn't read it, but yesterday he mentioned it, so I'm curious about his point of view, but you can make your own point of view in Prague. What I will not be talking about is also Chaloupecký's exhibitions of Czechoslovak art in basically the two most relevant exhibitions at the second half of 60s took part in Rome and in the Akademie der Künste in Berlin. It's another task of mine for which I'm working on for the book Socialist Exhibition Culture. Zsuzsa is here, also one of editors of this volume. It's a task which unfortunately I have not yet fulfilled, and the topic of next conference in Prague in November. So it's also something I will not speak about today. So I have 5 simple points. Which thematize, let's say, the broader context of the agenda of a critic and theorist whose work has raised many questions that we still deal with today as relevant issues. The first point. productive model of cultural transfer is functional schizophrenia in the case of Chalupetsky in some sense. The transfer actor is an agent. Chalupetsky had been a guest of party committees, Communist Party committees in Moscow, and knew the rhetoric of Artists' Union in Czechoslovakia, while always finding his way quickly into the underground. He resisted the division between West and East in some sense, center and periphery as well. Chalupetsky questions the task and status of the, it's very pathetic definition, but he is still speaking about it. Task and status of the artwork in contemporary society, and tries somehow to ignore whether his conception of transcendence through art is happening in Paris, Prague, New York, or Moscow. For him, the model of the contemporary artist is Marcel Duchamp, of course. Chalupetsky is an internationally well-known Duchamp researcher. He corresponded with him, apparently met him in person, and organized this exhibition in Prague at spring 1969. And I don't know any photograph where Chalupetsky would be depicted together with Marcel Duchamp, but we have this photo, shows him with Duchamp's Milan gallerist, Arturo Schwarz, who was a close partner and friend of Chalupetsky, and he met him during his Schwarz visit to Prague, 1967, and it was the starting point for this famous Duchamp exhibition in Prague, briefly after Duchamp's death at spring 1969. One more paradox, most of all Chalupetsky, this global player, fought against emigration. It was the real evil in the art history and theory for him. In fact, he forbade the artists he influenced to emigrate. Emigration, in his view, is artistic suicide. He claimed that even Chagall never created anything new after his Vitebsk period except kitsch. So it is this strange let's say, framing of the West and the East. In Chalupetsky's case, it's kind of negative complementarity, I would call it. Negative complementarity, because Chalupetsky does not know which is worse for art, state socialism or the capitalist market. He acknowledges the Western canon. On one side, it's the starting point for all his thinking, also about Eastern European art, but at the same time tends to believe that ideological censorship is not as dangerous as commercial mechanisms. It would seem that in the Cold War era, the public intellectual must decide which side to take. It's the primitive point of view. Chalupetsky was against both, or for both. In any case, he refused to make this kind of decision. He hated ideological subordination of art to slogans, but he also hated the marketability and market slavery of art, and most of all, he hated the global nomadism of artists, which from today's point of view may seem really, really strange, but it's also a kind of challenge, I think. So, disdaining the aura of dissident art, he condemned for example, the 1974 famous Bulldozer exhibition in Moscow, which was liquidated by KGB, power. So for Chalupetsky here, he's asking his Moscow translator about it. This action, Rabin Rukhin, it's the two organizers of this bulldozer, so-called bulldozer exhibition, and he's writing, I don't like their art, so he was against this political, metaphorical art of Oscar Rabin, and I don't like this exhibition, and I don't like their art. So this political instrumentalization, although Chalupetsky was a very political agent and transfer actor, was something which he criticized all his life. And in this letter, he became from Eduard Steinberg, a very prominent artist from Moscow, so-called unofficial art, a very detailed description, it's written like few days after the exhibition did take part in a park at the periphery of Moscow. So I would say to this East-West dynamics that Chalupetsky sought in the West what he found lacking in the East, and he sought in the East what he thought the West lacked. So it was a kind of funny complementarity. Third point, excuse me, it's my German deviation. For Chalupetsky, the Eastern European issue is not an imposed commonality that would become established with the emergence of the Cold War. So it began earlier, and in this case, the profitable aspect is that Chalupetsky was born 1910, so he did have an experience. Patočka was mentioned. Chalupetsky knew the cultural system in the democratic Czechoslovakia of 30s. He was already interested in Poland and in Russia during 30s when he was a very young socialist, and which he remained throughout his life. And even then he was interested in comparative aspects. Culture exists for him only as a transfer already during 30s. He wrote reviews about Polish modernism, translations in Czechoslovakia. He wrote about Russian exhibitions as a 25 years old young critic about Tinyanov, the protagonist of Russian formalism, and his prose translated into Czech at the beginning of 1930s. And it's I think also an interesting point that the starting impulse did not come after 45 or 48. In this period of 30s, Chalupetsky was doing some field research and collecting material. He's not doing it hegemonically in the sense of the Western canon. His approach is comparative and descriptive at that time. Not yet this kind of big transfer manipulation as we know him from the later period of 60s and 70s and 80s. He is concerned with the genealogy and coexisting of certain phenomena in different contexts. He is very young and does not yet formulate his post-ritual and transcendence-focused philosophy of contemporary art and culture, which will later become his main program. So it's this kind of genealogy of his work. Fourth point, Chalupecký's ideal of his utopia, it's a parallel presence in different worlds, I would say. It is an inherently missionary model. Chalupecký believes that, let's say, Jiří Balcar or František Janoušek, Vladimir Yakovlev or Eduard Steinberg, and of course Ilya Kabakov will be understandable everywhere. He creates export versions of them in foreign languages or tries to do so through exhibitions. Sometimes he is a kind of prophet, as in the case of Ilya Kabakov. He met Ilya Kabakov. Kabakov was like 30, and he said, this is one of the most important artists worldwide. So Kabakov was absolutely unknown in his Moscow milieu and working as an illustrator for the state publishing house in Moscow, illustrating a lot of child books at that time. So sometimes he is a prophet, as in the case of Kabakov, but often he is also a kind of Don Quixote. The two monographs he considered most important in all what he wrote. It's a monograph on Duchamp and a monograph on Richard Wagner. He claimed him as an unknown Franz Kafka of the Czech modernism at the beginning of 20th century. These both major monographs, which he constantly offered to someone to be translated, to be published, were never published during his lifetime. In this kind of transfer universalism between Poland, Russia, and Czechoslovakia, and Western art magazines and publications and exhibitions. He did a lot of publications, a lot of issues, a lot of successful networking cases. But what was the main task for him? It was actually it actually failed. It's my last point. Do I have 1 minute or two? No. I don't need, so we will have more time for discussion. I would call this this agenda, because I think this unsuccessfully we are speaking all the time about the phenomenal crossing the border success of this artist agents, and I think what failed these cases of not completed tasks and even lack of any success in some stories. It's also very inspiring. So I would say something like that we can observe even by such a famous agent of transnational transfer as Chalupecký was. And in my last point, I would call it triumph through setbacks. So his main books were not published. His idea of mutual understanding between Russian and Czech artists failed. So it was a great agenda. I don't know if you know this story. It's one of many hundreds of documents which are illustrating the story of exchange. Chalupecký organized trips of Russian artists to Czechoslovakia. Jan Kilevský came, Ivan Čujkov came, Kabakov, Pivovarov, Natalia Balakova, and Anatoly Zhigalov, and few others. And it was, and he visited all most important Czech artists, in not only Czech but also Slovak artists, and this idea of communication actually failed. So Russian artists have been not really interested in what Czech colleagues were working on, and vice versa. And the Slovak, by the way, the Slovak part of this story was more successful because the strong conceptual issue in the Slovak art saved somehow this miscommunication. So it's also, I think, inspiring, this misunderstanding and this lacks of communicative impact. So today he can be named, nevertheless, one of the most important actors of cultural transfer in Eastern and Western Europe in the second half of the 20th century, inclusively all he was not able to realize, to accomplish. So here you can see the Chujkov's report about this misunderstanding between artists in early 80s. Thank you very much for your patience.